Hello and welcome to the Unbroken Ground. My name is Paul. This is season 2, episode 34, and it is going to be called Sermon on the Mount Nationalism. And it's really something I've been thinking about. For those of you who don't know, maybe you do know, I every now and then blog over on Pathos, but since 1st of July, I've been started school, going back to a second master's degree in data science, and so I really haven't been writing very much. But this week I had a break. I had a week off, had a little bit of break, and so I did some thinking about writing an article about how Jesus. Nationalism could work if we followed the Sermon on the Mount, or wouldn't work, or how fun that would be. So I'm going to talk about that as a podcast instead. It might end up as an article as well, but hey. For now, it's going to be a podcast. So yeah, as always, if you want to throw back some comments or connect, facebook.com/The Unbroken Ground, theunbrokenground@gmail.com. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Threads. You can find me on BeReal or Snapchat, all underneath The Unbroken Ground. So yeah, let's jump into some Sermon on the Mount nationalism. So here's the deal. I think that just to get a baseline foundational understanding of what I believe, because I don't necessarily really feel like I fit into any kind of political party or stance. I think there are viable things that each party tries to accomplish and stand for. And I think that the extremism of the political culture right now is actually more likely to divide us and cause issues, and so because of that, it's not really what this is about. But foundationally, I do think that Jesus Christ, if you follow Jesus Christ and He's the Lord of your life, then it should make a difference in how you live. It should make a difference in how you think. It should make a difference in how you treat each other, other people, how you go about your life. I just in a sermon this morning, listened to my pastor preach on what difference if Jesus is Lord is, and Paul says, whatever you do, right, you do it to the glory of God. You do it to His glory. So whatever it might be, you live in the light of that. So if you're a politician, then you should live in that light. And that is the standard that if someone is going to claim to be Christian, then that's the standard that I would hold them to, that they would live in such a way that they bring glory to God. Now, that being said, I do think that, unfortunately, a lot of Christianity and the support from Christians has been politicized. It was hijacked in a lot of ways, and almost became a litmus test if you were in or out. And it divides. It causes unnecessary angst and conflict between people. And it is really not much to do with the unity of God's church. That being said, it's very important. It's very important to be, as you are called, to be active in creating good laws to make sure that government is living in such a way for all people. I think that it's important. If you didn't listen to last week's podcast, this will be a little bit. If you didn't listen to it, you'll get. And this will be new. But if you listen to it, it's a little bit of a review. I think that the fruit of your life should reflect that you're following Jesus. If your life doesn't reflect that, so I mean, your job. If you're a politician, that's your job, and your life doesn't reflect that fruit. And I'm not even talking about like some people who would be like, oh yeah, well, they don't go to church. Like they're busy. No. Do they more and more exhibit the fruit of the Spirit? And if they don't, then Jesus himself says that you'll know them by the fruit, that you know a tree by the fruit. So if someone says, oh, I'm a follower of Jesus, or I'm a Christian, I fit into the because honestly, most politicians are, especially if they're Republican, are going to say they're Christian because that's who other Republicans vote for. And the goal, a lot of times, as a politician, it's very lucrative, and it is to stay elected. So you say the things that get you elected. You say the things that are going to make the people who vote for you happy. And some believe that, some live that, some fruit does appear. But if you live a life, if you say I'm a follower of Jesus, but you live a life that has no fruit, then I'm not even judging you. I'm not even trying to, like, because if I don't know you personally, it's actually pretty hard for me to say definitively that you don't have that kind of fruit. But the word of God stands against you. If you don't have that fruit, and you need to examine yourself. I mean, we all need to. That being said, that was a long diatribe of foundation. I will say this as a political statement is that if someone is declaring whether or not someone is a follower of Jesus based on how they vote or how they who they support in elections, if they're saying that if you don't vote for one political party, you're not really a Christian, that's just flat out wrong. That is improper. It's bad behavior. It's not what Jesus would do at all. It's not what Christians should do. It's wrong. So, you at best, again, at best, what you can do is you can look at the fruit of someone's life. You can look at their heart as much as you can, because you can't actually know a person, but you examine their life. And there's no automatic, oh, you voted for one political party, then you must not be a Christian. Or if you voted for a specific political party, you must be a Christian. That's not a thing. That's not a thing. That's not. And here, and above and beyond all that, here's the reason why, is because the Jesus things supersede history and borders and governments. It just does. Like the things that make you a follower of Jesus are true no matter where you might go. So for the first century Christians, as they found themselves in Rome and found themselves being oppressed, as they found themselves being, used as guinea pigs and entertainment in the Colosseum, and found that they were being, persecuted and struck down, and like those things, is very true. That the way that they could follow Jesus was true. And so they lived in a way that they didn't get to really determine any kind of governance. They had to live underneath Caesar or kings who may or may not have been corrupt, who may have been directly worshiping themselves or any number of Roman gods or any number of Greek gods at that. That they had to live underneath that rule. And they lived in such a way, Paul says, and Peter says, like they lived in such a way they prayed for their leaders. They prayed, they complied where they could, and tried to live as peacefully where they were at. Now, if you flip that and you get to where we're at, in America, and it's like, yeah, you can 100% declare. In fact, you're in the majority usually. You're at least popular majority in a lot of ways. You can declare things. Although that's changing, obviously, with but Christians are not seen as fringe or unable to affect the power in the government. That's something that has changed. with the right, as they would call it, the Christian right, the conservative Christian movement, to kind of hold politicians' feet to the fire, to make sure that they at least would give lip service to the fact that they would follow Christ, and in order to get other Republicans to vote for them. And so, that kind of political power is a double-edged sword in a lot of ways, but it is not true for other Christians everywhere. So it is not the singular experience of following Christ. So we can't distill it down to that. So then we can't, in my opinion, then if we can't distill following Christ down to that, like all followers of Christ of all places have the ability to choose their political party. And so then if they choose their political party incorrectly, then they are not followers of Jesus. Well, that doesn't distill down to like people in China who don't get to choose who governs them, but they still choose to follow Jesus. So, I think we just end point here before we get into the Sermon on the Mount part, is that we must admit that there are people who love Jesus who will vote Democrat, and there are people who love Jesus who will vote Republican, and there are people who don't love Jesus and will vote for those too, each one. And so it's not a defining thing of whether or not you follow Jesus. Now, obviously, there are those that feel more called to be a part of that world, and God bless you, because that definitely is not my thing. Voting, yes, but being a politician or trying to figure out government is not where God's called me, and that's okay. He has other people that He's called to do that. He's prepared those works for other people and not for me. So, But just think for a moment. So we get into nationalism, and so just to give you a brief definition of what nationalism we're talking about there is the idea that the government should be on the shoulders of a certain religion. So Christian nationalism, particularly, is that government should hold itself to the religious standard of Christianity, and almost be like the arm of the church, that it should be not just influenced, but directly created, and the laws should all be reflected in the major beliefs of the religion. And so there's this idea that, we would then have, Jesus as president. People have said that, vote Jesus for president, or that we would we would acknowledge that our government was being run in a religious way, from a religious foundation. And that's the kind of the idea behind Christian nationalists, is that basically, Christians should take over the government, not necessarily in a revolution kind of way, but like get elected, and then create policies and laws that reflect the moralistic leanings and understandings of the church. Those major reasons. There's many, many major problems with this, obviously. One is that, as I talked about in 2 podcasts ago, but just how different the movement of Christianity is across the United States, and also just across the world. And so the struggle there is like which set of rules and laws and understandings are we going to live from? So that's a major thing. And then 2, history has proven that when the church has been tied in with the governance of a nation, so tightly that like there is a one church or one religion for a nation, then that has actually hurt the witness of Jesus. And this is kind of obvious, but if you create a nation or you create a government that relies upon making sure that everybody believes the same way, or at least agrees to believe or not challenge the ideas of a religion, then you have people who will use it as a way to advance. And so they're like, oh, well, I will I will figure out how to be to seem like I know all and I'm following this religion so that I can, stay out of trouble or I can advance. And it's not heartfelt at all. And it's anytime you try to force religion on people, we tend to push back against that, or become ambivalent about it even. And so you can look across all these places that have tried to do that. The Church of England, which has had in the past few years, England itself, not the Church of England, but has had some revival at least. But it doesn't necessarily increase the morality or the number of people who believe, just because the government says you have to. And in fact, it may drive more people away than not. The fastest growing places right now, honestly, in following Christ, are persecuted. The Southern Hemisphere, in China, in Africa, in these places where it is illegal to gather and to worship Jesus. It's growing. It's by leaps and bounds. And so I think in some ways there are probably some very good intentioned people that would be like, yeah, let's set up a government based on Jesus. But those are some major problems. I think a third major problem, and probably to me the most insightful one, is that Jesus didn't. Jesus didn't set up a government. Like that's one of the things that just got him in trouble with his contemporaries, because the Messiah, as the Jews thought it, when Jesus was to come, when the Messiah was to come, that he would then kick the Romans out and establish a government on his shoulders for the nation of the Jews, whether that be Israel or Judah. That's what the Messiah was supposed to do. And so, when Jesus came and talked about, tearing down the temple and rebuilding it and those type of things, and when, Jesus' followers were like, is it time to rise up? Jesus is like, put away the swords. And he goes to the cross. But remember the words he said to Pilate. Pilate, ask him, who are you? And he says, if you knew I have the power, over you. And Jesus, like, you don't have the power. If I wanted to, I could, call down armies of angels. I could just get up and walk out of here, right? If there was anybody who could set up a government that would be long-lasting and would be beneficial to all who lived in its governance, it would be Jesus. And yet, Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus sets up a movement of ragtag, often dense, not getting it type of people, and he spends 3 years filling them, building into them what it means to live a kingdom life, and then he releases them upon the world. So, that being said, I think it's fun to think about what it would look like if we did have a government, but not the kind that I think most Christian nationalists or who call themselves Christian nationalists think now is that they want a government that's just a little bit more moral, that looks a little bit more like them, that thinks a little bit more like them, that makes them more comfortable to be Jesus followers, or at least to be members of a church that's not afraid to say things. But you know, what if we really were? What if we really got serious as a country that we were going to follow Jesus, and we were going to do that in our country, our whole government. We were going to follow the Sermon on the Mount, and I'm not going to go through all the parts, but I mean, just some of the parts that you were like, that would be insane to think about as a government. And to be clear, as I start this, let's be honest. Jesus himself is not, the Sermon on the Mount is not a how do you govern the world. But what if it was? I'm not sure that governing the world like this would work. But who knows? I don't know if anybody's ever tried. So let's think about some of the things that Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount and in his life and in his teachings. And what if we govern that way? So statement 1. You have heard it said, love those who love you. You're good at loving those who love you. But I tell you, love your enemies and those who persecute you. You know, what a counter-cultural thing. What would it look like for a government who loved its enemies? And I think it's important here to realize that what it means to love. Like, not just have like warm, fuzzy feelings towards, but actually, I like what Rob Bell once said about it, and that this love is actually a little bit more. It's actually like, I pray for blessings. I hope that my enemy finds success. I care for them. I love your enemies as you would love yourself. Imagine what would that look like? I mean, he Jesus describes it. He goes on and he says things about this. He's like, if if a soldier comes to you and asks you to walk a mile, you go a second mile. Like, what would it look like for a government to be like, oh wow, how do we go an extra mile for that other country? How do we go an extra mile for that place that's next to us that we're neighbors with? How do we be such a blessing by the way that we live to them? And even like, how do we care for the people in our country? What does that look like? What is proper taxation? What is proper, what's proper care for people who are low income? What's proper care for people who have no health insurance? What's proper care for people who are mentally ill or who are addicted? What would it look like to love those who weren't lovable? What would it look like as a government? Because these are things Jesus says, right? Like in real life, like he actually says these, like Sermon on the Mount and his teachings. What if he said to all the rich people, and let's just admit that if you're in government, you're rich. If you're in the United States, you're rich. There's very few, although majority, if you're listening to a podcast, you're probably pretty rich, comparatively. So Jesus comes and says, hey, you guys are doing great, but you're lacking one thing. And we're like, oh, all right, Jesus, what is it? And Jesus says, go ahead and take all your possessions and sell them. Give them to the poor, and then come follow me. It, like, is that the kind of government we want? Like the Jesus government that's like, hey, what are you doing with that wealth? Well, you got to get rid of it. You got to give it to the poor. You gotta like, and now you're like, oh, well, that sounds, hey, that sounds a little bit like communism, socialism, right? Oh, redistributing wealth. But, I mean, think about it. Jesus actually warned, Jesus never says, woe to you who are poor, because you're lazy and you messed it up and you made bad decisions and you got into the wrong you went the wrong direction, you dropped the ball. Woe to you who are poor. Jesus never says that, but he does say how he says, woe to the rich. He says how hard it is for them to enter into the kingdom of heaven. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. Woe to the rich. Woe to those woe to you rich landowners whose workers' wages cry out. Woe to the rich men who decided they were so rich that they needed to build bigger barns so they could have more richness and rich things and get more things. And as they built the barns, their very life ended. Meaningless. Sermon on the Mount, he says, don't store up treasures on heaven. Do store up treasures in heaven. Don't store up treasures on the earth. So a government that doesn't store treasures here, what does that look like? What does it look like for your life? To be so unconcerned. And let's just admit it's hard. In our culture, in our capitalistic life that we've learned, it's hard not to get caught up in the materialistic, in the wealth, in the we need more money, we just need a little bit more comfort. Like and yet, Jesus is going, don't store up treasures here on earth, but instead store up treasures in heaven. What if a government lived in such a way that it was like, hey, yeah, we're storing up those treasures in heaven? What if our greatest export as a country was not the the things we make, the cheap plastic things that we export or import, but what if it was our kindness? What if our greatest domestic product that we exported to the world was love? Like 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 people would be like, um I don't know about anything else they do there, but they know how to treat us with respect and kindness and love. Like they make me feel seen. Like what would government look like that would do that? Jesus says things like, woe to those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Woe to the poor in spirit. Or not woe, sorry. Blessings. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are for those who suffer. Like, if that were the foundation by which we truly understood greatness, I mean, Jesus even says, "Blessed are those who serve and come last, for they will be made great in the kingdom of heaven. He who makes himself the least, God will make the greatest." Imagine a country that wanted to be the least and not the greatest. Imagine a country that wanted to serve rather than be served. What would it look like? I think that I honestly think that it's hard for me to think about because I think there's so many hesitations and um, fear of losing control that lives within the ideas. You know, one of the ways that we tend to police the world, that as a modern world, the way we tend to police is through violence, through war, through threats of nuclear war, deterrence. Um, Sometimes the world feels like the only way to get anyone else's attention is through this violence. And what would it look like for it to be a country that was like, we don't we don't we don't want to participate in war? I get it. It's hard because what do you do about? I mean, do you give up that sovereignty, right? Of saying, yeah, we're not going to have a standing army that's better than yours. We're not going to spend billions and billions on um, arming people and developing better military and making sure we have the military just in case. Um, I mean, even in the Old Testament, when they had um, God as their king, and then after that they had a king, but who, like, they still had an army. They still fought battles. So, so I think it's hard to imagine what it might look like to have kind of a Jesus Sermon on the Mount nationalism because we just we just never seen it done before, and it also would take some pretty supernatural protection. I think it would take God stepping in and fighting battles for us. Um, and at the end of the day, it's crazy all that to think about. All those things I talked about are things that Jesus challenges us about our lives, our little kingdoms that we have, the space that we control, that our thoughts, our hearts, our minds should have all those things. We should realize that wealth is about what we can store, the treasures we can store in heaven and not here on earth. Woe to the rich. That we're called to be the least so that we can be made the greatest, that we can be the servants, that we can be here just like Jesus to serve and not to be served. That our lives are like that. Um, that in all honesty, um, I don't know that you could create this side of heaven a government that didn't also have to have enemies that they killed, wars to be had, guns to be bought. This side of heaven, I don't know. I think it's just hard to imagine. It's hard to picture because it's just not something that we experience. And because what do you do? How do you respond when you're threatened? I think that's just hard because government, it's, the flip side of this is that the United States is made up of so many diverse ideas and people that we just aren't ever going to have. We can't. It's not going to work. It's not who we are, and it's just we're not going to be fully Christian as a nation. Um, and so we have to figure out how to live with each other. But all that to say, come back, some concluding thoughts. There will be, there will always be, until Jesus returns, there will always be sin in the world, and that will drive wedges and between countries and people, and cause wars, and that's just, I think we have to admit that's part of the reason Jesus died, was so that he could counteract all that. But his kingdom is advancing, is building, but it's not fully here yet. And until it is, these are the realities that we deal with. So dealing with reality, praying for our leaders is a biblical mandate, whoever your leader might be. And I think we must remember that if we say that God puts one candidate in, even especially if it's the candidate we like, we also have to admit that he puts the candidate in that we don't like. That God just puts candidates in. That God places people in those places of authority, and we just have to accept that. And we pray for both. And B, C, I don't know where we're at here. We should find ways to connect and unify, and not take joy, it seems, in driving wedges and delegitimizing people following Jesus just because we don't like their politics. On both sides. Calling out everybody here. But yeah, what do you think? What do you think when you think about a government run on the Sermon on the Mount? I think it'd be beautiful. I don't know if the world is ready for it or capable of that yet. But that's my hope. I wish. That's my dream. That we would love our enemies. That we would bless those who persecute us. That if someone hit us, we would turn the other cheek. That if we were asked to walk a mile, we'd walk a second mile. That we'd love others as much as we love ourselves. That we would care for the poor and the rich. And that the wealthy would have the reminder that their wealth here on the earth is meaningless, and that we need to build treasures in heaven. And that Jesus is worthy to be followed. But I think at the end of the day, Jesus continues to leave us with an invitation. That's one of the reasons he doesn't set up a government. He didn't. Because it just doesn't mix. Because his is an invitation. Will you follow me? And too many times when you get into authority and you mix that with government, it becomes you must. You don't have a choice. And people rebel, and they never get to see the love and the kindness that comes from the invitation. So even today, even now, you have that invitation. Jesus saying, will you follow me? Tomorrow, now, right in this moment, will you follow? And you got to choose what to do with that. As for me and my house, we've chosen to follow the Lord. May you choose likewise. God bless you guys.